Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at Special Booster 2.5, and this set offers us lots of new and powerful tools in order to build and iterate on some new and existing decks. And today's deck I'm going to be taking a look at is going to be the latest iteration of Jesmon. So, Jesmon in the past was more sistermon focused, and this time around he looks to be kind of ditching that while still leaning a little bit into it, and he's going to be more GX focused. So this deck more specifically is going to be designed around utilizing GX, so as a result, based on the types of new cards that we're going to be playing around with, we're going to be running a fairly lean and slightly awkwardly to look at deck, but trust me, it kind of works because of how much searching power that this deck actually has. The main idea of the deck is pretty simple. We're just going to evolve into Jesmon, keep our turn, play out Genkumon, then Genkumon's ability will allow us to digivolve into Genkumon X. Genkumon X's ability will allow us to have protection for our whole field, limiting how the opponent is able to respond to us, which puts us in a really good position where one of two outcomes is going to be happening. The first one is obviously ace baiting the opponent, so that way we can actually use GX to disrupt the opponent, or if they don't do anything about our Digimon, then we use GX on our turn to try to apply lots of pressure and close out the game with. Either way, it's going to be putting the opponent into a really poor position, no matter which way you spin it. The biggest weakness of the deck is the fact that this is basically a setup deck, where if you don't find your cards fast enough, you kind of just lose the game because you're not really doing anything. So even though the deck does have a lot of consistency tools, it still can brick, and that puts you into an awkward position, especially since Jesmon already was working with consistency issues on top of some really weird ratios. Then this build, more specifically, you're not really going to be interacting with the opponent, so that can basically leave the opponent unchecked to be able to do whatever they want unless you are in that checkmate position, utilizing the deck's main playline. But because it's utilizing only one main playline and the entire deck is focused around it, it is a fairly one-trick pony that's pretty easy to read and potentially play around. So with all that in mind, I do think that this deck is a pretty strong deck, but compared to some of the other decks in the meta, I personally wouldn't necessarily recommend taking it to a high level event, but I do think this deck is really strong and has lots of potential and power behind it. So with all that said and done, let's just dive right into the deck profile and see what we're working with. Starting off with the Digitamers, just run something that's going to draw you cards. It could be a BT8 Gurimon, but it also could be the 4 copies of a BT14 Koromon that I'm electing to use. So they both are really decent at drawing cards, but I'm favoring Koromon over Gurimon because Koromon can actually let me move my rookie out of raising, attack with it, and if I'm dealing security damage, draw a card that way, where Gurimon can't. But Gurimon does have the benefit where I don't need to check the security in order to get the card draw, so they both have their own sets of pros and cons. It really doesn't matter which one you use, as long as your egg is drawing you cards to make your deck as consistent as possible. And then when it comes to the main level 3s, I'm going to be running 4 copies of the brand new BT20 Huckmon. So this Huckmon is really good at upping the overall consistency and tempo of the deck, because at the start of our main phase, we get to discard a Huckmon, Sistermon, or Royal Knight card from our hand and be able to draw 1 and gain 1 memory. So we're essentially replacing what we're losing, setting up our trash because we are slightly utilizing the trash, and gaining a memory to increase our overall memory efficiency. It's just a really fantastic card for us to use as a result. Then its inheritable ability isn't doing anything too special, where it's just during your turn, all of your Digimon get plus 1000 DP, which is really nice having a field buff as an inheritable. And then for more added consistency, I'm also going to be running 4 copies of the BT6 Huckmon, because this has a simple on-play ability where we get to check the top 5 and add 2 cards with Huckmon, Jesmon, or sistermon in its name from among them into our hand, and then the rest go to the bottom. So it's just your stereotypical digger, but it's digging pretty deep, and it can add up to 2 cards of what we're trying to look for, so it's just increasing the overall consistency, which is why I'm also going to be running 4 copies of the starter deck 12 Sistermon Blanc. So this card has a nice on-play ability to allow us to discard a card to draw 2, so it's a net neutral on hand, but the fact that, again, similarly to the BT20 Huckmon, it's allowing us to help fill up our trash with the cards that we need specifically in there, while also cycling through our deck. And then she even has the added benefit of adding some extra protection, where she's going to have a decoy for red and black Digimon, as long as we have a Digimon with Huckmon in its name or Royal Knights in its traits on our field. Next, on to the level 4s. This is where things are kind of getting a little bit more trim, like more trim than your normal Digimon stack-based deck. So technically the rookies were already pretty trim, but this is where things are going to get a little bit trimmer, because I'm only going to be running 4 copies of the BT20 Bao Huckmon and 2 copies of the BT13 Bao Huckmon. So 6 level 4s seems pretty light, but again, we're just banking on seeing a lot of consistency tools to find the one stack that we actually want to build it all the time. So what the BT20 Bao Huckmon is doing is it has a main effect that happens once per turn, where we get to play 1 card with Sistermon or Genkumon from our hand and have its play cost be reduced by 2. So it's just allowing us to be able to play our cards a little bit cheaper and more efficiently. Then it also has the same inheritable ability as what we saw with the BT20 Huckmon, where it's just applying more of a field buff, so all of our Digimon are going to have as much DP as we could possibly give them. And then when it comes to the BT13 Bao Huckmon, it's kind of doing something slightly similar to the BT21, where during our turn, when we play a Digimon with Sistermon in its name, we get to Digivolve this into a Savior Huck from our hand and reduce the Digivolution cost by 2, allowing us to have as much tempo as possible when we're going to be playing out our cards. Then it also has a nice inheritable ability for when we play a Digimon with Sistermon in its name, we're going to gain 1 memory, but because we're not super Sistermon focused, this ability isn't going to be triggering all that often. Then when it comes to the level 5s, I'm only going to be running the best level 5 for the deck, and that's going to be the 4 copies of the BT20 Savior Huckmon. So Savior Huckmon is going to have a nice on-play and when Digivolving ability, where we get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 5000 DP or less, essentially allowing us to pick apart the opponent's level 4 or lower Digimon. More specifically, we want to get rid of any pesky floodgates that might be stopping us from making our plays possible. Then this card also has a nice secondary ability where at the end of our turn, we get to suspend one of our other Digimon to have this Digimon Digivolve into a Jesmon in its name from our hand for free. So that's already really powerful, especially if we already have a body sitting on our field. Otherwise, we're ideally just going to be playing a rookie and then using the end of turn ability to Digivolve into our Jesmon. But this is a fantastic ability to help us with our overall tempo, especially since we actually want to use a secondary body, because the inheritable ability on this card gives our Royal Knights traded cards the Alliance ability to put more damage and pressure on the opponent. And then when it comes to the level 6s, this is where things are going to get a little bit awkward again compared to your more conventional stack-based deck, because we're actually running a lot of megas and a high quantity of them, because of how important these cards are for how the deck wants to function. So obviously I'm going to be running the BT20 Jesmon at 4 copies, because this card has an on-play and when Digivolving ability to essentially be able to play out a token, and that token is is going to be a white Digimon with 6000 DP that also has the blocker, reboots, and decoy red and black abilities, allowing us to not only use that for Alliance, but have a potential plan B for a defensive playline. Then it also has a secondary ability where during your turn, when any of your other Digimon are played, which he's doing it himself because of his when Digivolving and on play effect, we get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 8000 DP or less, then one of our Digimon can attack. So we could attack essentially the turn we go up into this card, even if the memory passes over onto the opponent's side, which is really good while also removing even more potential bodies off their field. Then when it comes to the main level 6s, the Jesmon is kind of take it or leave it, and it can be replaced with any other Jesmon, but I honestly think that the Genkumon from BT20 and Genkumon X Antibody from BT20 are kind of must-haves for the deck. So Genkumon is allowing us to reduce his play cost by 4 as long as we have a Huckmon, Jesmon, or Sistermon named card on our field. So it's essentially a Mega that's going to be playing itself out for a cost of 8, which might seem like a lot, but if the opponent is unable to do anything, then the amount of memory we give them doesn't necessarily matter. Then Genkumon himself is going to have Reboot and Blocker, again for more defensive capabilities, while also having an on-play and when Digivolving ability, where one of your Digimon can Digivolve into a level 6 or lower Digimon with Huckmon in its name or Royal Knights in its traits from our hand or trash for free. So this is what's allowing us to be able to Digivolve into the aforementioned Genkumon X that we're also running 4 copies of. And we really want to capitalize on Genku X because of how strong this card more specifically is, because when we Digivolve into him, we get a D-Digivolve 2 on one of the opponent's Digimon, which is a really good form of soft removal because a lot of cards don't have the ability to protect against D-Digivolving. Then on top of that, if Genkumon or X antibodies in this Digimon's Digivolution source until the end of your opponent's turn, none of your Digimon are affected by their Digimon's effects. So it's going to make it very difficult for them to be able to get rid of our Digimon unless they have option abilities or very specific effects like Collision or Raid. Then on top of that, it has a secondary ability where during all turns, all your Digimon with Sistermon or Huckmon in its name or Royal Knights in its traits also gain the blocker and reboot ability. So essentially, as I kind of stated before, the turn you go into Genkumon, you're going to use his effect to Digivolve into Genkumon X, and then all of your stuff is going to be blocker and reboot, so that way you could be aggressive during your turn, and then defensive during the opponent's turn. And because your Digimon are going to have some good protections, it's going to be really hard for them to fight against you, especially since he has the inheritable ability for when we use our Jesmon GX, where during the opponent's turn, while this Digimon is Jesmon GX, all of our Digimon are going to also gain and retain that blocker and reboot ability. So again, we just have really good offensive and defensive lines of play. Then when it comes to the level 7s, I kind of was just playing around with what ratio split would be good because I do think both of the Jesmon GXs we have are really strong and fantastic cards. So I just decided to keep it simple and go with a 2-2 split. But you could play whatever ratio amount of each that you feel like you want to play. So I'm still going to be running the BT10 Jesmon GX because this has a nice when Digivolving ability where we get to place a Royal Knights traded card with a play cost of 13 or less from our hand or trash underneath this Digimon to the bottom of his Digivolution source, and then we get to activate one of that Digimon's when Digivolving abilities. And this card then also gains Blitz, so it can attack even if the memory passes on to the opponent's side. So the idea on utilizing the old GX is the fact that we could reuse Genkumon's protection ability over and over again to make it really hard for the opponent to fight back against us, allowing us to have multiple ways to be able to apply that protection. Then on top of that, its all turns ability is what's adding a lot of punch factor for this deck, where while this card has a Royal Knights traded card in its Digivolution source, this Digimon gains Piercer, Blocker, and Security Attack +1 for each card. So the more inheritable sources he has that are Royal Knight traded Digimon, the stronger he's going to be punching the opponent. And then when it comes to the new GX is actually a really strong ace Digimon for us to use because it's not a Blast DNA, it's just a Blast Digivolution, which is really good. The DNA Digivolution is more specific to Jesmon and Genkumon, but that doesn't necessarily matter as much. What we're trying to use this card for is that Blast Digivolution because it has an on-play when Digivolving and when attacking ability, where it triggers once per turn by placing a Royal Knight traded card from our hand or trash to the bottom of this Digimon's Digivolution source. We get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with as much or less DP as this Digimon. So he's ideally going to be pretty strong and beefy to be able to remove whatever threat the opponent is trying to swing at us with. Then he has a nice secondary when attacking ability that triggers once per turn, where we get to unsuspend this card, and then for every 2 Royal Knights traded cards in its Digivolution source, which he himself is going to be building up, then we get to trash the top card of the opponent's security, so we could pair that up with the Alliance, and we could try to deal a lot of damage pretty quickly when we go up into this card. And then when it comes to the Tamers, if you want to run a memory fixing Tamer, I wouldn't blame you for doing it. We do have a couple of really decent ones, but I feel like if you could get your setup going, you reasonably don't really need one. It's not going to hurt you by any means, but I feel like the 4 copies of Analog Youth are a little bit more important because this is one of the cheapest and most efficient searching Tamers in the entire game. Because for the low play cost of 2, we get to check the top 3 cards of our deck and grab any 1 Digimon from among them into our hand, and then we trash the rest, which we kind of already established isn't necessarily that big of a deal, especially in different variations of the deck. We do have ways to actually grab other cards out of our trash thanks to some of the awakened forms of Sistermon. But the secondary ability isn't too bad either when it triggers. We're not trying to get this to trigger, but sometimes it happens where during all turns, when one of your level 5 or higher Digimon with Digivolution sources is deleted, we get to suspend this Tamer, gain a memory, and hatch a new egg in our raising area. And then when it comes to the options, we do have various options that we could run, but I, again, just designed the deck to be fully focused around trying to get into Jesmon and then Jesmon GX and set up the Genkumons, so that's a lot of cards we need to see, and, well, we have a lot of good consistency tools to use to get us to that goal, where I'm going to be running 4 copies of From Master to Disciple, because it's for the low cost of 2, searching the top 3, adding Huckmon, Sistermons, or Royal Knight traded cards, which is pretty much everything in the deck from among them into our hand, and then the rest go to the trash. And its delay ability when it's get placed into the battle area is actually pretty good at keeping as much tempo as possible, acting kind of similarly to the training cards, where the next time our Digimon would Digivolve, we get to reduce the Digivolution cost by 1. This does stack, so it does have more flexibility than some of the training cards, and the training cards don't necessarily work that well because of just the slight awkwardness on what the deck is trying to do in terms of its color and ratios. Then the security ability is still pretty decent, basically being a copy of its main effect, so whether it's checked in security or not, we're always going to have access at this card. And then the last option of the deck is going to be the 4 copies of Garnet Memory Boost. So because we are playing with a couple of different colors, red and black being the 2 primary colors we're playing with, this is just one of the better cards at helping us, again, just find exactly what we need, allowing us to check the top 3 for a red or black Digimon, and then the rest go to the bottom of the deck. Then this card goes into the battle area for its main ability to delay on gaining us 2 memory, so we could use this in combination with From Master to Disciple to have lots of memory to make whatever play lines we want or need, while keeping the consistency of our deck as high as possible. So that's pretty much it for my interpretation and iteration of the deck based on what the new cards are doing. I do understand that Jesmon does have a lot of depth and you could build him in a couple of different ways. So there is just a lot of interesting tech and tools that we could use, and we're not limited to just specifically what I was thinking about, because we do have other generic tech that the deck can run for the colors that it's playing in, or just generic tech in general, We do have other cards in the Huckmon line that we could run on top of other Royal Knight synergy cards, and we even do have a couple of different sistermons that could help synergize with the deck, again, all depending on how you're going to be building the deck and what the sistermons are going to be doing for the deck. But when it comes to some potential future upgrades and support, right now we don't have any confirmation of any direct support, but given the fact that Jesmon is a very popular Royal Knight, and Royal Knights are, well, very popular in of themselves, I'm sure that he's eventually going to get more support in the future. What that looks like, we don't know, so for the time being, we're just going to have to continue to explore with what we do have on top of any other generic tools that we could get in the meantime. So that's all I really have for this deck profile. Feel free to tell me your thoughts about it down in the comments below, and while you're down there, feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date for when I either go live or upload next. And with that, I hope to see you all in the next video.